All right, this is part 12. There Was a Man, the Saga of Gordon Kahl, a True Story. Top of page 97. The bullet struck somewhere near the lower left-hand corner of the windshield. He ducked down behind the dash so I could only see his head. About this time, the other man, Cap, raised up and aimed at me again. I shot again. The bullet struck the door and caused him to duck each time before they could aim and fire. I don't know how many times I fired until the man on the passenger side, Cap, fell, and I was able to tell he was out of the fight. The driver, Cheshire, must keep in mind every time it says Cap or Cheshire, that's in parentheses, so that's been added, I think, by his granddaughter. The driver, parentheses, Cheshire, must have seen this as he moved his gun from Scotty's direction toward me. I fired several more shots at him each time he raised up to shoot at me. I finally realized this could keep up till my 30-round clip was empty. My bullets appeared to be ricocheting off the windshield and doorpost. I ran around toward the side of the vehicle, firing at the door as I went, to keep him down until I got around far enough to get a clear shot at him, at which time I knew he was out of the fight also. I ran back where I could see the third man, Hobson, from his northbound vehicle just in time to see him raise up to shoot at Scotty, who had run over to Yory. Before he was able to pull the trigger, I fired and he, Hobson, fell to the ground. At this time, I saw the man who was behind the front end of the Green Mercury, Schnabel, raise up and aim at Scotty. He saw me swing my gun in his direction and he ducked down behind the car. I could see his feet or legs beneath the car, and I fired, striking him and putting him out of the fight. He received a flesh wound in the leg. I ran over to the man in the east ditch, Schnabel, thinking he might still be in fighting condition. When I got nearly to him, he raised up his head and said, "Don't shoot me again, I'm all done." He had his hand on his shotgun, so I took that and his pistol, which was in his holster, and threw them in the back seat of the Green Mercury. I didn't see the man who had been behind the Mercury and who I thought I'd hit in the leg, so I don't know where he'd gone to. He had gone into the ditch and was disarmed. Grandpa probably ran to Hobson and then to Schnabel. A pickup had pulled up behind the northbound vehicle, but I didn't notice anyone in it or around it, and I assumed it was the pickup we saw on the top of the first hill as we came out of Medina, and which I believed belonged to the city, but as to who was driving it, Henham, I have no knowledge. Scotty tells me he saw one Wigglesworth and possibly two men run out into the trees and hide, but I have no way of knowing who they were. I think from the reports I've heard on the radio, which was in the Mercury, that the car which came from behind was the one the marshals were in. If this is so, they weren't the ones who fired the first shots. The two men who were in the front seat were both looking in the direction of the Green Mercury when they were shouting, "Who fired?" And then on this page you have a picture of Yory von Kahl when he was a young man. Yory's .45 auto, which he had in his shoulder holster, had either a rifle or pistol bullet embedded in the clip, shattering the grips on both sides. Had he not been wearing it, he would have been killed instantly. Whether this was the first or second shot that was fired at him, I don't know. One was buckshot and the other was either a rifle or a high-powered pistol from the way the bullet looks. I didn't see it, but it sounded as though Yory's gun fired after he was hit. I think probably his finger tightened on the trigger when he was hit, but I don't know. Neither he nor Scott fired before this, but I know neither he nor Scotty fired before this, and whether either of them fired afterwards, I don't know. I know that if they did, they didn't hit anyone, and as I knew when I hit each one of them myself. This is the extent of Grandpa's written account of the scene. While Scott was running to Yory, the injured Cap started running north in the east ditch, according to later testimony. He held onto his dangling index finger with the same hand and onto his bleeding head with his left hand. We lost. Once he paused and turned briefly. The This triggered Scott and Grandpa into leveling their rifles at him. He resumed his retreat, and they lowered their rifles from the man who had blasted Yori repeatedly and had fingered the Medina group. Upon arriving at the firehouse, he implored Chief Graff. Look what they've done to me. I want you to go down there and kill all those mother effers. Graff ignored him and sent the ambulance to the scene. I wonder why Cap kept pumping lead into Yori after he was sprawled head east on his belly in the mud. As Scott was running to Yori, Grandpa was in the middle of the road after disarming Schnabel. Grandpa asked Brower, lying on the pavement, if he was hurt. He was not. Grandpa went by the Ram Charger headed toward Yori when he was startled. According to Scott, the scare came from Cheshire reaching for his rifle. Grandpa quickly reacted, shooting for the second time into the cab at short range, exploding Cheshire's head. Cheshire slid out of the cab onto the pavement. The shooting was ended. Grandpa had fired a total of 13 shots in the fracas. Hobson laid on the pavement injured. Muir and Cheshire were on the pavement dead. When Cheshire was first injured, Cap asked him if he was hit. Yes, but not bad. He answered, probably referring to his neck wound or hand wound, and broadcast on radio, officers hit, officers hit. The time was 5:56 p.m. Shortly thereafter, following more shooting. Cheshire said, I'm hit bad. The shooting had lasted about 15 or 20 seconds according to the court transcripts of testimony. Scott turned Yori over near the pole. Blood was everywhere. Yori said, I'm going to die. I'm not going to make it. He handed Scott his .45, saying, They shot it. They shot it. You take this. I'm not going to need it anymore. Meanwhile, Grandma in the station wagon asked loudly, Is Yori hurt? Someone answered her affirmatively. Scott told Yori, Hang on. I'm going to take you to the doctor. You've got to just hang on. And then at this point on the page, there's a picture of Scott fall as a young man. Scott got Yori to his feet and moved toward the station wagon. Yori collapsed or slumped down, saying that he couldn't go on and needed to rest. He was all bloody. Grandpa came from the Ram and helped with Yori. Noticing that the other vehicles had the Kahl wagon blocked, they put Yori in the front seat of the Mercury police car. Scott drove it to Dr. Martin's at high speed and was waved through by Chief Graff at the fire station. Grandpa, driving his station wagon, was close behind, followed by Dave Brower and Wegener. Rescue personnel were arriving at the scene and took Schnabel and Hobson to the clinic. Wigglesworth crawled back to the road and took charge at the scene of the shootout, being ever cautious of his imagined man in the woods. Mr. Reardon came out of the house, later recalling one of the deputies' bullets came within 4 feet of my little 4-year-old boy. The Kahl group never shot in that direction. The marshals did. Some of the rescue personnel assisted Doc Martin in tending to the wounded at the clinic. Graff established a command post at his home to coordinate law enforcement activities. He evacuated the Reardons to a relative's house in Medina. The shootout scene was cordoned off. Now, to be sure, the shootout account is as accurate as I could tell it, based on all the information I could collect. Where probabilities were involved, I told the most plausible version. If you were to listen to the government's version, especially their earlier ones, you would hardly recognize it as the same encounter. They had Yori firing first and Scotty executing Cheshire. My lawyer friend drew some definite conclusions. Everyone, especially Grandpa, underestimated his prowess with a rifle and its efficacy. Grandpa shot about 13 times, with 7 or 8 of them inflicting bodily injuries. The .223 caliber lead bullets with copper jackets tend to disintegrate when striking an object. Grandpa's decades of carrying a rifle essentially gave him a third arm. His accuracy was almost beyond belief. As Louis L'Amour wrote, "There's a little cowboy in all of us." The government became outraged over Grandpa's assault on the law. Grandma and her church friends feel the fallacy in this is that lawmen acting as hoods, even though technically legal, are not society's law. In their first week of law enforcement training, officers learn not to attempt arrest when peers or family are nearby, which might cause him to resist in order to save face. They are taught not to endanger bystanders, nor to arrest one when armed friends are observing. Grandpa lived openly and could have been arrested most any day on the streets of Carrington while unarmed and alone. Within a few hours, Grandpa was to become the government's most wanted man. Grandpa was forced to kill in self-defense, but was later killed himself for not doing that which, according to IRS Commissioner Roscoe Eggers, Jr., millions of other Americans do not do: file voluntary income tax returns. At least that's what some of Grandpa's friends told me. Or was this the real reason? Many think not. Maybe it seems that I'm stringing incongruities and absurdities together in a wandering and sometimes purposeless way, as they say Mark Twain did, but really I'm doing the best I can to relate the real story. And then at the bottom of this page is a photograph of Gordon Kahl in 1941 standing next to a gasoline pump, what appears to be he's operating a gas station. Then on page 104 and 105, there is a diagram of the cars and the shootout and where the cars were located. Where the mobile home was located, where Gordon Kahl was located, the pole, the telephone pole, and things like that. Yori von Kahl. Page 106, Chapter 17, Roundup. The phone rang. Hello? Hello, is that you, little Dolly? Yes. Is Yori okay? I'm with him now, Grandma replied. It looks bad, but Dr. Martin and the others are doing their best. Don't worry. I'll call again tomorrow and I'll tell you all about it. But Yori needs me now. Bye. Dr. Martin had returned to the clinic by the time Yori arrived. A very white Yori was laid out on the examining table. Dr. Martin had extensive experience with gunshot wounds in the military. Yori had 2 minor wounds, one grazing his chin and one through his upper arm. His 2 major wounds were through the right kidney and a chest wound higher up. He was given a drug to inhibit arterial bleeding and Stadol shots for pain. Dr. Martin then called Dr. Kostick in Jamestown, alerting him for surgery. Then intravenous blood transfusions were started. This fella's not going to make it, too much internal bleeding, Dr. Martin had said initially, but at the same time he was encouraged by the vital signs. It looked bad. Mom, I'm not going to make it, moaned Yori. Will you take care of Janice and the kids? You are going to make it, responded Grandma, not quite believing it. Yes, I'll look after Janice and the children. Joan was herself again after blacking out during the ride to the clinic. Take my boots off, said Yori, and Joan did. Hobson had been treated by others at the clinic and indicated that he was not in much pain. Dr. Martin accompanied the 2 seriously injured patients to Jamestown in the ambulance. While en route, Yori mumbled, Doc, I did what I had to do. Hobson was treated and evacuated by helicopter to a hospital in Bismarck. Hobson was the other passenger in the ambulance. His pulse was continuously monitored by Dr. Martin during the trip. Yori's kidney and gallbladder were removed in surgery, plus the small intestine being resected. The large intestine perforations were sewed and a liver injury treated. He remained critical for an extended period. It was a close call. He was under arrest and his hospital room was guarded. Grandma called again to let us know what all was going on. Hobson was the other passenger in the ambulance. His pulse was continuously monitored during the trip by Dr. Martin. Hobson was then treated and evacuated by helicopter to a hospital in Bismarck. Later I found out that 3 months later Hobson still required assistance in walking and could not remember many of the details of that day. I was a whole man when I went to Medina that day, he later said. Such a statement pricked the heartstrings of the jurors, as it would anyone with compassion. It also helped thwart justice, some say. I should tell you what happened at the Medina Clinic, as Scott told it later. At the clinic where the injured were being treated, tension was overwhelming. Cap exclaimed to Scott Fall, Boy, you are in big trouble now. The rescue team had taken him there soon after Yori had arrived. Scott didn't answer, but the statement filled him with fear. He didn't know what the lawmen were coming there to kill him. The statement puzzled him, as he didn't know exactly what was meant. Grandpa came into the clinic brandishing 2 mini 14s. Miss Martin, the doctor's wife, shouted, Get those guns out of here. Grandpa and Scott then left the clinic, driving in the city's green Mercury police car. Grandpa drove to Heaton on back roads, parking the car in a clump of trees in the middle of a field, about a mile southeast of the farmhouse. While en route, Scott asked, "What am I going to do? What's happened?" On the next page, on page 108, is a map of southeast North Dakota showing Medina, Jamestown, Streator, Carrington, and Ashley, Bismarck, and Fessenden. "Scotty, I don't know," Grandpa responded. They rode quietly for most of the distance, but over the silence hovered a cloud of fear and sadness. They walked to the house where Grandpa discarded Lynn's stocking cap and picked up some items of clothing. My grandpa got $5,000 at the house, which he had paid for a recent land lease. They left in the AMC Rambler, which Grandpa had repaired earlier in the day. Scott left his car at the farm, and they traveled some 40 miles on back roads to within 5 miles of Scott's home near Harvey. The car was then parked inside a deserted farm building, and the two remained there for the night until the next evening. That night on brown paper, Grandpa wrote the letter describing the events of the day, along with remarks explaining some of his beliefs. A later writer philosophized, "Born in blood, this nation was, reborn it shall now be." Lewis R. Bean Jr. Scotty wanted time to think and sort things out. Before leaving, he put his rifle on the rafters and left Yori's pistol in the Rambler. "Where can I go?" Scott asked. "I don't even know where I'm going," Grandpa replied. Scott decided that he wanted to go home, partly because of the little spat with his wife the day before. "Oh Lord, in our extremities, what gargantuan problems our minds muster from trivia," he thought. He wanted to talk to her and then turn himself in, but that the love that cures panacea to both the giver and receiver was apparent. Grandpa gave Scott the letter he had written and insisted on driving him closer to Scott's home. Both he and Scott were bewildered how Scott had gotten involved in such a situation. Fear of being shot held them back from going directly to Scott's house. Instead, Gordon dropped him off at a neighbor's. Scott saw Arlie Roller's lighted barn and began walking toward it. "Oh my God, Scott," Miss Roller exclaimed as she ran out to meet him. She put her arms around him. He explained that he was concerned about his family. Arlie came from the barn and spotted them. Scott explained that he probably should turn himself in, knowing from his portable scanner that the police were looking for him. When Scott asked about his wife, Arlie told him that he thought they locked her up. Scott left his .45 and shotgun in the shop, and they went into the house. Scott called attorney Ted Siebel, asking if it could be arranged for him to be turned in safely. After another call, Siebel came after Scott, taking him to the sheriff in Fessenden. He was later taken to Jamestown and then to Fargo. Dave Brower and Vernon Wegener left the shootout scene in Dave's car. They too were waved through by Chief Graff. They went to Streator using back roads, so that's why Darrell was not at the meeting, said Dave en route, referring to Graff. Mostly, though, they rode silently. Wegener, though, back on how Joan started crying after she asked if Yori was hit, and he had confirmed it. While en route, and at Dave's suggestion, they decided to call Chief Deputy Sheriff Jack Miller. Vernon knew him personally from the time when Wegener served as a police officer in Streator. They called him at 6:33. During the time the two were together, Dave indicated that he had some apprehension while lying on the pavement that Gordon might shoot him for not helping defend the group. Of course, this was pseudo-fear, completely without basis, and was soon dispelled by Grandpa, but real to Dave at the time. Maybe he felt a little guilty about playing possum. Miller and other deputies came out and talked with him. They returned at 2 o'clock that night and arrested them. Wegener remained in jail until Good Friday, April the 1st, when his bond was reduced from $100 to $20,000. This day is more properly called April Fool's Day because he pleaded guilty to forcibly impeding federal marshals in their duties. He had agreed to turn state's evidence and pleaded guilty to a minor charge with the potential of a 3-year sentence. Otherwise, he faced a potential sentence of 25 years plus fines if convicted. The cop-out affected Brower's trial later. As preview to the nature of the trial to come, Brower's attorney was prohibited from asking Wegener what kind of force he used or how was doing nothing using force. Wegener pleaded guilty to a lie. You know, if Brower had subsequently been found innocent, which in fact he was, he would have served more jail time just waiting for trial than Vernon served, who pled guilty to a felony. Wegener never went back to jail for his felony, and I think he knew pretty well that he wouldn't all along. But I'm really getting ahead of my story here. Let's go back to the Medina clinic after the shootout. The ambulance had taken Bradley Cap to the clinic, then quickly went to the shootout scene. Rudolph Hoffman, an elderly member of the rescue team, remained at the clinic and ministered medical help to Cap. Dr. Martin was occupied with the more seriously wounded. During this time, Cap said, "We could have talked it over instead of shooting." Hoffman interjected, "That's a heck of a thing to do, shooting people over income tax." Another of them said, "It's more than just a little income tax." Dennis Krambich, a farmer and a member of the ambulance squad, was at the clinic. He had attended 4 of the earlier civic meetings being concerned with farm foreclosures. He later related that he owned a number of firearms, including an AR-15. He also told of a posse comitatus that had been organized the preceding year by the citizens of Medina to combat any threat of transient motorcyclists. He drove the ambulance that Sunday. After Grandpa let Scotty fall out of the car that Monday night, he was headed north. He quickly turned southward, probably on the back roads of the foggy prairie, on which entire states can be traversed. He eluded the dragnet and presumably headed for Texas or western Arkansas, or both. Rumor has it that the Rambler was cut up and buried in Texas. Who knows? Someone does, but they're not saying. Grandpa was the only one in the party who was not quickly arrested and originally charged with first-degree murder, plus numerous other charges. Originally, according to the record, I saw his bond had been set at $1 million by the Texas court for his alleged misdemeanor parole violation. If that was reasonable bail, I've got to wonder what his bond would have been for the Medina shootout. Of course, there would have been none. Earlier on that Monday, KXMC-TV reports Ray Schobinger and Peggy Ulrich made a quarter-hour tour of the Kahl farmyard in their car, taking pictures after the shootout and before the task force assembled. Okay, we're going to stop there. We're going to pick up the next part on the top of page 112. The next part will be the top of page 112.